everybody, it's James back here with another video. Today we're going to talk about fascism from local person of color Trump supporter Dinesh D'Souza, and we're going to see if fascism is right wing or left wing. So is it right wing or left wing? Before we even start this video and go through his weird dishonest bullshit. Sorry, I just ate right before I click play. But before we go through this dishonest bullshit, fascism is right wing totalitarian ultranationalism based on creating a mythic past, always complemented by traditionalism, racism, sexism, and homophobia, and it's likely in many incarnations racist by definition. A lot of people try to foist upon fascism as a left wing ideology because socialism is in the name, National Socialism. But the movement that was led by Adolf Hitler in the 1930s and early 1940s had absolutely nothing to do with socialism or leftist values. And in fact, he imprisoned and executed a lot of people who were thought of as leftists, and whether it was militants or philosophers and political activists. So, and it's like a lot of Republicans nowadays, and I know this video is a little bit older, about 6 years, but I hear it very often from especially dishonest right-wing populists. Like I hear it from Tim Pool. I hear it from how I want to say a lot of actual Nazis would say this, and a lot of people would try to say fascism is just generic authoritarianism, and they try to distance themselves from the fascist movements of Mussolini, or Imperial Japan, or even in some of the things that were done in South America, in order to create this dichotomy of trying to basically say that all leftists are just because they try to say leftists are authoritarians that are pretty much trying to make sure people have the same rights as everybody else has the same rights, and then they try to say it's also fascism after trying to say leftist values or things that leftists fight and push for or are authoritarian. So I'm going into this, without a Google search, but I wasn't gonna Google search it at first, but I wonder if this is on Google search. Oh, whoops. Hmm. I was typing in a video title for one of my other videos that went up today is fascism right or left, not the video. Sadly enough, on Google, that PragerU video might come up. Yeah, far right authoritarianism. And what really is funny about this, especially modern day fascist movement, with a lot of the word authoritarian getting thrown around and stuff like that, is a lot of right wing people are the authoritarians, because you have a lot of right wing people who are and I mean real racial segregation. It's not you just saw like a black 14-year on Twitter saying that they was kind of like annoyed by white people at Kroger. I mean, you got a lot of people who are actual segregationists. You got a lot of people who are, anti-race mixing. You got a lot of people who are deeply homophobic and sexist and controlling about the values that people can live by and the things that people can and can't do. So, yeah, I feel like the problem with authoritarianism in general is a right wing. Is a right wing problem, and that's for dictatorships such as the USSR in the Chinese government, and even things like the Khmer Rouge. A lot of actual leftists, especially in the West, view those regimes as red fascism, with less in common with what leftist philosophers actually envisioned for a leftist society, and actually have more in common with I want to say with white supremacy in not white supremacy, but with the fascist dictatorships of Nazi Germany and Italy. So let's see what Dinesh D'Souza has to say. Hey, another thing about Dinesh D'Souza nowadays, he's a convicted criminal. I don't see why this guy just can't follow the law.
He's a fascist. For decades, this has been a favorite smear of the left, aimed at the
And I will say at the end of the day, sometimes fascists can be misused, because if somebody makes like an off-color joke, or I want to say has a couple of right-wing political views, that does not make somebody a fascist. To get called a fascist, and theory by most leftists who are very usually more experienced in political thought and political understanding than your average liberal or even conservative, you don't just get called a fascist because you just want people to work hard. You don't get called fascist because you're Christian. You won't get called fascist because you're white. You won't get called a fascist because you're black and you love your black skin and stuff. Like, being called a fascist takes a special grain of authoritarianism and hatred with a right wing bent that leads you to be called a fascist. Because a lot of fascists, often at the time, one thing you would notice with, again, right wing populism nowadays with Trump, Dinesh D'Souza can count here, ironically enough. Tim Pool, I feel like, is the best example of this, right? They will use a lot of left leaning, pro worker language, but then it leads in not in wealth redistribution or upward mobility for the working class, but it will ironically lead to more austerity politics and white supremacist political values.
Those on the right. Every Republican president, for that matter, virtually every Republican, since the 1970s has been called a fascist. Now more.
I mean, that's because often at the time the Republican Party are stupid enough to work with fascists and accept them at face value in their ranks. You will notice, especially in the Republican Party, and I'm not gonna go over the Southern strategy shit. I don't feel like it right now because I know some fucking white conservative zealot wants to and they do like the little ugly dream work smile with the fucking ear to ear smile. The Democrats are actually founded the KKK. Like, dude, I know, but don't forget about the Southern strategy and the slowly switching of political values between the Democrats and Republicans and stuff like that. In the past, 50 years of legislation, but Republicans are often at the time willing to work with and accept people who are fascists into their ranks. And I'm not just talking about your average American like skinhead punk. I'm not talking about your average like white supremacist community leader or something like that. They accept actual Nazi politicians into the ranks of Republicans, especially post Civil Rights Act, because they really veered hard towards the Southern strategy and appealing to people's bigotry. So that's why Republicans get associated with white supremacy and fascism. Not to mention the whole Southern strategy came with a lot of, bad rhetoric. They saying people are, what's a good one? Thugs and criminals in the inner city, drug addict, the entire drug war, and all the rhetoric surrounding the drug war, the hyper militarization of the police, the hyper traditionalism against women and LGBT folks, and it goes on and on. In authoritarianism, where there's no objective truth, they don't ever believe that they lose an election, and they believe, and it's like I feel like every Republican politician, probably since Nixon, but I think Trump is the best example. They don't think, and I guess Bush didn't do this, so I can't say that, but I believe Reagan did it. And Reagan and Trump, I know they both did it. They don't believe they just are an elected official. Republicans, politicians sometimes believe that this country is owed to them, and they will pull any dirty trick in a book or tell any lie to convince their audiences, of mostly, ironically enough, working white people, that they got to fight for the country for them to stay in charge. Otherwise, this group of people is going to take over. Not to mention, all the anti-immigrant rhetoric. I can go on and on about this shit all day. And, but Republicans, they track and getting called fascists from working with fascists and using fascist rhetoric.
More than ever. This label is based on the idea that fascism is a phenomenon of the political right. The left says it is, and some self-styled white supremacists and neo-Nazis embrace the label. But are they correct? To answer this question, we have to ask what fascism really means. What is its underlying?
I wonder if we're going to get a real definition, or are they going to try to veer away from the target of this discussion, because you notice throughout this entire video, and I know it's been like 2 to 5 minutes or what have you, I've actually been breaking down actual political thought and social phenomena among right-wing people, particularly the Republican Party of the United States, that shows fascistic beliefs or fascistic values. Because let me tell you something, because I think I seen this video a couple of years ago, ironically enough, and I feel like I was more of a liberal back when I used to watch PragerU. I never voted Republican, but I used to be a stupid liberal, or like anti-SJW. I kind of got sucked into that. But my point being is that okay, this video is not going to actually break down different political ideologies and discuss actual thought processes that may lead people to fascism or lead one side of the political spectrum or another to fascism. This guy is going to try to talk about history and veer you off the subject enough to where he can kind of he can falsely create an argument that fascism is left wing, because I think he's going to talk about like Giovanni Gentile and Mussolini were former socialists. But you can go from socialism and become a fascist. Some modern interpretations of that look at Haas or Jackson Hinkle. Like you can go from politically far left to far right because you feel like you want to make more money, or maybe you just don't like working with the dirty insert minority name here. I don't want to keep saying jokes like that. I don't want to get banned from YouTube, but and that's what I remember Dinesh D'Souza does in this video, and this accomplishes nothing except completely turning people from the subject of discussing actual political theory, because he could have talked about the 14 points of fascism and see if they apply to his party or himself or not, or he could have talked about actual political ideology in a vague way, because I feel like Dinesh D'Souza, he's supposed to be a smart guy. Like, you're supposed to be able to discuss these political ideologies on your own merit without necessarily diving, and I guess you can dive into history to support your points, but not like this, because this is a complete misrepresentation and disframing of history and how things actually work.
Ideology. Where does it even come from? These are not easy questions to answer. We know the name of...
Frankly, is easy to answer. Where does fascism come from and what have you? It mainly comes from Benito Mussolini, I believe, was the first fascist, and Adolf Hitler in Imperial Japan kind of followed, well, especially Adolf Hitler at least, followed his way of thinking, and I think he even bumped it up to the next level, to be honest with you. Oh yeah, even in Spain had a fascist dictator who they had to bomb to in order to get rid of. But my point being is that the thinkers of fascism like Giovanni Gentile, Benito Mussolini, and Adolf Hitler is actually, ironically enough, because fascism, I want to say, even after socialism, Marxism, and communism, is to a large extent a very new ideology. And I feel like it's very new because it's not an ideology that's necessarily brought out in philosophy and political thought, but it's brought out in raw reactionary tension of working class whites, especially. Not to say black people can't be fascists, because black separatists and supremacists are fascists. I feel as if though like groups like the Taliban, Al Qaeda, ISIS, they are fascist. But I believe the Israeli government, ironically enough, is a fascist government. The Iranian government is a fascist government. The Chinese government is a fascist government. But fascism, in the way that it works, is not gonna, in where it came from is, in the way of thinking of how we describe fascism and how we see the signs of fascism is very known throughout political thought and political history. And anybody who says otherwise is being dishonest, because they want to distance themselves away from the actual history of where fascism came from and how it was brought about, especially in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, and try to talk about a different subject that has nothing to do with the conversation that we're having right now, or supposedly.
The philosopher of capitalism, Adam Smith. We know the name of the philosopher of Marxism, Karl Marx. But who's the philosopher of fascism? Yes, exactly. You don't know. Don't feel bad. Almost no one knows. This is not because he doesn't exist, but because historians, most of whom are on the political left, had to erase him from history in order to avoid confronting fascism's actual beliefs.
Not really erased him from history, because I believe if you actually look up on like Wikipedia or something and you want to find the political history of fascism and its origins, of how, and it's adjacent ideologies most of the time, which is white supremacist fascism, which is the most dangerous and the most common. But you can find these people, and at the end of the day, I feel as though this discussion about Giovanni Gentile is completely irrelevant, and I feel like the discussion should be moved forward to Mussolini and even Adolf Hitler, because they are the ones who actually put fascism as an ideology into practice and use working class sentiments to appeal to a frustrated, especially white working class, and and weaponize people's minority status or political thoughts or even religious beliefs to in order to upend the state and become dictators. Not to mention all like the underlying philosophy that was written in books like Mein Kampf. Like you can't even get there. And I believe Mussolini wrote a book too, but I feel as though like Gentile, although important, the more important people to discuss here would be Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. And anybody who goes around trying to I want to say circumvent away from that and talk about people that were before like 1930, I want to say, are just wasting your time with shit that's not gonna matter.
So let me introduce him to you. His name is Giovanni Gentile. Born in 1875, he was one of the world's most influential philosophers in the first half of the 20th century. Gentile believed that there were two diametrically opposed types of democracy. One is liberal democracy, such as that of the United States, which Gentile dismisses as individualistic, too centered on liberty and personal rights, and therefore selfish. The other, the one Gentile recommends, is true democracy, in which individuals willingly subordinate themselves to the state.
And he's in the way he's using this inflammatory language is always this lying bullshit where they try to associate left-wing political beliefs or left-wing political thought with generic authoritarianism, and they're trying to reframe things like freedom of speech, liberty, and individualism, ironically enough, as exclusively right-wing values when they're not. And in fact, most right-wing values are opposed to things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and even at the end of the day, individualism. I believe Hitler, and not even just Hitler, a lot of modern day actual fascists and white supremacists hate the idea of individualism, and I feel like the left and the right has is criticisms of individualism, but in different ways. But despite whatever the fuck the right is saying, let me tell you the real the left's criticism of individualism. The left does not criticize things like freedom of speech and personal liberties, but hyper toxic individualism, trying to do everything yourself, to live for yourself and think for yourself, only leads to a more exploitative society, especially among the working class, when the working class is not galvanized to work with one another against capitalism and white supremacy and other forms of oppression that persist in society. And Dinesh D'Souza just like extremely sidestepped that little detail for y'all, but there it is again. Like it's not that the left is anti-individualism. Is the fact that the right at the end of the day promotes toxic individualism. Then at the end of the day, some right-wing philosophers and thinkers, even of today, do not like things like personal freedom and individual liberties. And at the end of the day, also you can say that in part he's right, because at the end of the day, a lot of fascists do think that people's individual freedoms, and liberties should be co-opted in the service of the state. But these are two completely different ways of talking about individualism, and he's trying to merge them both together to disingenuously try to say that the left doesn't like our individualism and our fighting spirit, because he's trying to like kind of mold together civil liberties with vulnerability to exploitation. And these are two separate conversations about two different ideas.
His philosophical mentor, Karl Marx, Gentile wanted to create a community that resembles the family, a community where we are all in this together. It's easy to see the attraction of this idea.
You see what I'm saying? Like, number one, I feel like most leftist philosophers did not promote. They promoted we are all in this together, but as the extent to protect each other from exploitation and actually help each other along against a capitalist society that wishes to exploit working class people. And most fascists, both back then, I'm sure, and today, promote the family model as an nuclear family where women don't have rights, children are viewed as property, and people are not allowed to individually express themselves out of what's acceptable as a normal American in today's society. You get your Ford F-150, you get your factory job, and your wife doesn't get to work or have a bank account, and your kids are pretty much property that are going to grow up to be empty, soulless pieces of shit like you. and then you repeat the cycle. Fascists don't want people that deviate from society. That's why, you know, fascists have been against all forms of art, music, and education that deviates from, you know, this family oriented way of life. When the left says we are all into this together, that means we're going to protect each other from subjugation and economic exploitation by the wealthy, or you know, white supremacy. When the right says it, they means that they don't even care about being, because like so he's saying two things at once. Now that I think about it, because you can't say that that the right is about but I guess I'm like talking ahead of him. But you can't say that the right is about individualism and then try to promote, you know, the family and stuff like that. And you can't say that, you know, people that are, you know, when leftist philosophers speak about all in this together, and you conflate that with hyper traditionalism. That's you know, that's how they get you. Like they just say a lot of shit and try to mold words together that feel like they're smart or intelligent. But then when you dig a little bit deeper beneath the surface, or if you have political experience, you start to see like these arguments are pretty stupid, man.
Yeah, indeed, it remains a common rhetorical theme of the left. For example, at the 1984 convention of the Democratic Party,
this dude had to go back about more than about 30-40 years, bro. That's that's the year that like the Transformers toy line and cartoon and comic book was released, bro. You had to go back all these fucking years. And at this time, Ronald Reagan was president, fucking up and ruining America to seek to make the neoliberal hellhole that we have today. And I guess we just got to continue.
The governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, likened America to an extended family, where, through the government, people all take care of each other.
That's because that's what the fuck the government is for. And I really don't like this big government, small government argument bullshit from right wing people. And they try to, again, you see how he's trying to, because first of all, Democrats are not leftists. Democrats are centrist liberals at the most, and sometimes social Democrats these days at the most. But first of fucking all, bro, what does the government exist to do? You see, this is how our country and a lot of working class white people especially need to keep this in mind. But I guess even some black people need to follow along here in every race, I guess you can say, if you have right wing political beliefs. You see the neoliberal hellhole that we're in today, the toxic individualism, the lack of unionization, the lack of healthcare, lack of healthcare, the stripping of social safety nets, the stripping of public services like public transportation, road construction, what have you, and the stripping away of our education system to where a lot of people are stupid enough these days to believe that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, you know, which makes your kids a little bit stupider, which makes a society where it's hard for anybody, both man or woman, to want to have a family of any race. That comes from, you know, this bullshit, this individualist capitalist bullshit where, you know, the government can exist to stop gay people from getting married. The government can exist to, you know, quote unquote, get blacks off the streets when they're committing crime. But the government cannot exist to promote civil liberties, and the government cannot exist to support people in areas where they can't. Because I'm all about working hard and shit like that. And what's being said here by Democrats over the past couple of years is not some shit about seizing the means of production, nor some authoritarian force you to do something or to take away your potential to be who you are or have what you have. What they're saying is that we, as the government of the United States of America, will fill in places where you can't fill in for yourself. You don't have health care, we're going to provide health care. You don't have transportation, we provide public transportation. You need to stay unemployed and get on welfare or Social Security or unemployment for a while, we'll provide that. You don't make quite enough to go around, you make enough for bills but not for groceries, we provide you with food stamps. That's what the Democrats and a lot of social Democrats and even leftists, when they're siding with the Democrats on issues, mean about government support. Government support because the government should be there to help citizens where they can't help themselves. And that's been corrupted by, you know, people like Dennis Prager and all of his associated acts like Shapiro, Knowles, and Souza here, and by right-wing people since Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were in office, where the government can exist to take civil liberties from people, union bust, and make freedom for business owners and billionaires, but the government cannot exist to provide social welfare programs or public services for people. And that's what the Democrat Party's platform is, and that's what a lot of leftist platforms is. Even though the stuff about the left, it goes into season means production and stuff, but for the most part, the left is in favor of things that provide, just economic relief for people who work for a living. So keep that in mind when they say shit like this, because because a lot of especially and I see it in a lot of working class men that are watching like the hustle culture for like Fresh and Fit, Andrew Tate type shit. And I debated a guy on TikTok about this before too, but it's and he ended his live because I broke some shit down to him. This authoritarian bullshit where people are trying to say that the left is trying to force you to do this, that, or the other. But no, the left and the liberals are just trying to provide public services and social welfare programs when you can't fill in somewhere. Like let's say like $120 in food stamps. Even if you making let's say you get $900 a month, a week, right? Let's say you are making it, you hustling, you doing Uber Eats and shit. But let's say the government wants to give you about $150 in food stamps. You don't have to buy groceries. You can use that money for other things, your hobbies, your rent, other your appliances that's broken down and stuff like that. And that's the actual view of liberal and the leftists that actually ally with them. And these people, like I said, they try to say that quote unquote big government, is coming to take your guns or make you go to school with gay people, whatever. But that is not. That type of stuff is just language that they use to make you easier to exploit and take away your social safety net. They get your votes by lying to you about actual political positions of liberals and left-wing people.
Nothing's changed. 30 years later, a slogan of the 2012 Democratic Party convention was, "The government is the only thing we all belong to." They might as well.
That's a bad take right there, I will say, but at the end of the day, I don't feel like one misquote if he's taken in context with the rest of the rest of the conversation, because PragerU and a lot of right wing people just honestly clip shit out of context and it sounds bad. So I really don't believe, especially the slimeball criminal Dinesh D'Souza when he says that. But I will also say that was a bad take. But at the end of the day, that does not represent the platform of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is in favor, and by anybody's definition, especially versus somebody like me, is a conservative political party that just believes in economic stability for working class people by the provision of public services and social safety nets. And again, this thing where he's like trying to, and it's like this is also a tactic that right wing people like to use, where they provide the backdrop of some figure that people dislike, because somebody could be like trans women are women, deal with it, right? And then they will put like a picture of Adolf Hitler behind somebody saying that statement. So it's conflating right wing and left wing things, and then it's also conflating the fact that Hitler and other Nazis and his compatriots hated LGBT people, and it also promotes that false dichotomy of authoritarianism that they like to promote.
Well, have been quoting Gentile. Now remember, Gentile was a man of the left. He was a committed socialist. For Gentile,
I really don't believe that, bro. Like, I don't believe that Giovanni. I hate to take it off and Google this, but they will say anybody like Mussolini started off as a leftist, but I don't know if this guy did. And if he did, you can be a leftist philosopher and then move on later to being right wing. I'm not even sure if I should even put left. He was a student of. Oh, what? Really? Was he? I don't believe that. That's Conservapedia. Conservapedia, bro. They gotta make their own Wikipedia, because Wikipedia does not align with Cause I'm trying to see, was he associated? Oh, but yeah, but you could be one thing and come another. But this does not say explicitly that he was a leftist. He said it's just saying that he used some philosophies created by Karl Marx to develop his own ideology. And I will again say that you can be a leftist today and you can be a fascist philosopher tomorrow. Like, it's not a zero sum game or one to one dichotomy of what somebody will and will not believe. You know what I'm saying? You could study under, because somebody could have been like, it's for instance, dude, it's literal. I've heard like ex Black Panthers that are now Black Republicans. People change over time, and their political beliefs can shift and meld, but it does not necessarily reflect on their old political beliefs, because their old political beliefs or the philosophers that they used to correspond or work off of, political beliefs stay consistent. Marx, throughout his whole life, you will notice, stayed consistent. Giovanni is the one that deviated from what Marx taught or thought of to create his own political philosophy that will become known as the groundwork for fascism. So, yeah, fascism is also not a form of socialism, and fascism, depending on who you ask, both economists and sociologists, is not really workable either. But fascism and socialism, at the end of the day, especially being on the furthest end of one side of the political spectrum or the other, are diametrically opposed to one another's political views. Because, before we go forward, I will say this: the difference between fascism and socialism, or socialism and barbarism, is that fascism does not seek to uplift or help anyone. Fascism is just a bunch of empty promises by people who, by people who, I want to say, they promise, all this relief if we get rid of these people, but at the end of the day, it will not actually provide any upward mobility, and ironically will make life worse for the people that believe it. While socialism seeks to ameliorate the concerns of, and entertain the concerns of working class people, and actually provide some economic relief for the society that is applied to. And and these are like two different flags, because like socialism, at the end of the day, and please don't say no shit like socialism is about hurting white people. I don't want to fucking hear it right now, because socialism is mostly a it's an economic model that often at the time crosses over with social justice and stuff like that. You can be a racist socialist, ironically enough. But my point being is that socialism, at the end of the day, is about economic relief and prosperity for working class people, but fascism is about using scapegoat enemies to promote promoting a mythic past and creating a cold authoritarian society where nobody has any rights and freedoms. And fascism, in its more explicit forms, like neo-Nazism and white supremacist style fascism, or even like Black Hebrew Israelitism, as you ask me, these people are clearly opposed to a peaceful and prosperous world, and are more, in line to, scapegoat enemies and maintain the interest of the wealthy, ironically enough, and are not actually interested in alleviating the concerns of the working class. So let's continue.
Fascism is a form of socialism, indeed, its most workable form. While the socialism of Marx mobilizes people on the basis of class, fascism mobilizes people by appealing to their national identity as well as their class. Fascists are socialists with a national identity. German fascists in the 1930s,
which he's partially correct about. Oh, let me get that off.
Were called Nazis, basically a contraction of the term National Socialist. For Gentile, all private acts.
He's in part correct, but at the end of the day, these are two different political philosophies, and they are often at a time when talked about by actual academics or political, students and sociologists and what have you, and they are spoken about separately. Like, fascism can't be a form of socialism because it's like he's just said that it's doing something different. Where socialism and Marxism mobilizes people based on class, he just said that fascism, which is true, mobilizes people based on their national identity, which is 100% true. These two things are diametrically opposed to each other, which is why fascists are anti-socialist, fascists are anti-anarchism, and fascists are anti-communist, and even anti-liberal at the end of the day, let alone social democracy. Aw, my wife would be home at 8. But at the end of the day, though, he's like I said, he's kind of being very dishonest here. I really don't like this idea that of him trying to he's trying to smash together two things when he literally just said that they were two different things.
Action should be oriented to serve society. There's no distinction between the private interest and the public interest. Correctly understood, the two are identical. And who is the administrative?
But he literally about 2 minutes ago just described two completely different things that had nothing to do with one another. Like I don't understand, man. You literally, don't get me wrong, bro. He's a dishonest hack piece of shit. But he said the two different definitions where socialism is about mobilizing people on the basis of class and ignoring things like race or sexuality and identity, skin color, and what have you, but just class unity. And fascism is about national identity, like white supremacist forms of fascism like Nazism and stuff like that. He literally did a good job, ironically enough, at differentiating the two from one another. But I don't understand I don't understand what's his fucking point. Like, if you're gonna use and no, I won't look at the camera. Fuck it right now. I'm scrolling. But if he won't actually meld together these two ideas and actually how I want to say, if he's going to describe these two ideas as being separate, why bother, how I want to say, trying to, crowbar them back together? You said you separated these two ideologies and you perfectly broke down the difference, but somehow he's going back to saying that they're one and the same ideology. That's just weird to me, man.
Arm of society. It's none other than the state. Consequently, to submit to society is to submit to the state, not just in economic matters, but in all matters.
And then at the end of the day, socialism or other left-wing political forms of economic thinking is not about submitting yourself or things to the state or giving things to the state. When you really look at what socialism is, it's about the workers owning the businesses and deciding democratically on the means of production, while fascism and capitalism, because fascism, especially when it comes to economic, just continues the economic model of capitalism, but even worse, you can say, and also not only just worse, but reinforced by the state. Like literally, they say the privatization was invented by the Nazi regime, because that they are the supporters of capital. They are the ones that fold the authoritarian might of the state and the police force of the military with big business. So these are two completely different philosophies. Now you're just lying about what leftists to think. How society should progress forward economically. It's just lying.
Since everything is political, the state gets to tell everyone how to think and what to do. It was another Italian, Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator.
It took you long enough to actually bring him the fuck up, dude. Damn. Because this whole fucking video, I'm hearing about Giovanni Gentile, while important to the philosophy of fascism. I feel like he circumvents the circumstances of how it came about and its actual ramifications of how fascism came to exist in the modern world and its executions. So talking about a philosopher is completely different from talking about leaders of states like Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany. I want to say Batista from Cuba. What's the son of a bitch from Argentina? Not the new guy, but I forget the guy who was doing all that shit with helicopters and stuff. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I feel like that's him constantly talking about Gentile completely circumvents what you can say how fascism came about versus what it actually did, because a more honest interpretation of fascism and its adjacent ideologies like neo-Nazism and Imperial Japan and stuff like that, you actually gotta it's actually good to talk about people who did fascism.
Dictator of Italy from 1922 to 1943, who turned Gentile's words into action. In his Dottrina del Fascismo, one of the doctrinal statements of early fascism, Mussolini wrote, "All is in the state, and nothing human exists or has value outside the state." He was merely paraphrasing Gentile. The Italian philosopher is now lost in obscurity, but his philosophy could not be more relevant because it closely parallels that of the modern left.
And here we go with the dick-sucking, ignorant conflation about fascist right-wing authoritarianism and modern leftist thought, because these motherfuckers are ridiculous. And right-wing people have been doing this for fucking centuries, where they say someone, because let me tell you something about civil rights and economic freedom. It's not a zero-sum game. Just because one group of people gain rights, and I'm probably preempting what he's gonna say, but when one group of people gains rights, does not mean another loses rights. Let me say that again. When a minority of people gains rights, does not mean everyone else loses rights. And two, on that, freedom of speech is not freedom without consequences. So, for instance, like my favorite example to use for this, there are so fucking many, but I feel like the most laid out example is black civil rights, for instance, because remember when black people were slaves, and then it was like the government, and they literally succeeded and started a war of succession, because they did not want black people to have the same rights as white people, and not necessarily even the same rights, not even second class citizenship, because they thought that their slaves was owed to them, and they thought the bodies and labor of black people was owed to them, and then they were saying that the state was trying to be authoritarian and take away their slaves. They did the same thing, especially a lot during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s during the civil rights movement, where you would see a lot of people opposing the Civil Rights Act because the state is authoritarianly trying to make your innocent white daughters use the same water fountain as a black man. They wouldn't have said black man, by the way. They'd probably said something with the letter N in it, just just so we know. But and even on top of that, after the Civil Rights Act passed, and even some conservatives, or I guess you can say Nazis and fascists, like James Hake, will say that the Civil Rights Act is authoritarianism. So every march forward for socioeconomic equality for any minorities, and it goes to other examples like for women, for LGBT people, and and then even like rich businessmen would do it, and a lot of and ironically, I hate to dunk on white people so much in this video because I love white people, but a lot of working class white people are stupid enough to believe that business regulations and things like minimum wage are authoritarian. So anything that can actually make life better or move the ball forward for minorities and workers is marketed as generic authoritarianism, which they are now trying to conflate as being fascist. And I'm preempting this a lot before they give any examples, but the very thought is it's not really funny, even though I'm chuckling a lot while talking about this. It's flagrantly, like, it's disgusting and fucked up. Where they're trying to describe you know civil rights for other minorities of people as a zero-sum game.
Gentile's work speaks directly to progressives who champion the centralized state. Here in America, the left has vastly expanded state control over the private sector, from healthcare to banking, from education to energy.
Not really, at the end of the day. Most of these institutions, barring education, well, I would say the left-wing people have influences on, I want to say, healthcare and education, but energy and banking is clearly in the influence of right-wing zeitgeist, I want to say. Only reason why the left has influence on healthcare and education is because most intellectuals become left leaning. A lot of college students are left leaning, so they go on in their life to promote left wing values. But at the end of the day, I feel like the whole hospital system and the way that things are run and how we don't really have free healthcare. You get hit by a car, that's coming out of your pocket if you don't got insurance, and the driver could have been drunk and everything. You better sue. But I would say, but if we're talking about who actually owns and run college institutions, this is run by right wing people, which is why these people are so firmly against things like student loan debts. And then the energy sector is of course run by oil billionaires or people like the Koch brothers, or the people that own like Sunoco, Marathon, and shit, who actually fund money into the Republican Party or into conservative think tanks to convince people to lower taxes and deregulate things like stock buybacks and the banking system too. So like this bullshit, like don't get me wrong, like I guess like these motherfuckers be thinking like they heard a banker, right? Like let's say like Chase Bank has an ad says, "We accept you no matter who you are," right? And then they somehow try to draw the dichotomy of not only will they say that that's anti-white racism, but they would draw the dichotomy to say that it's under leftist control because they're not overtly being racist or indignant towards black people or supporting a popular movement. So these people or this guy Dinesh D'Souza doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about.
This state-directed capitalism is precisely what German and Italian fascists implemented in the 1930s. Leftists can't acknowledge their man-gen.
Socialism is not capitalism in any way, shape, or form. Actual socialist states, I don't feel like one has ever existed in all of history, despite places like the USSR and China trying to market themselves as socialists or communists. A socialist state has never existed, period. Because most of the time, yeah, these places are state capitalism, but that is not the values of most actual leftists. And ironically enough, in countries that claim to be socialist, like I said earlier, they had more in common. They were red fascist countries who had actual more in common with Mussolini or Hitler. They never actually did socialism or communism. I feel like socialism and communism for the USSR and China and even Vietnam are just backdrops for revolutionary sentiment for the authoritarian powers that came to be to take over the government. And the actual socialists, anarchists, and leftists were purged.
Because that would undermine their attempt to bind conservatism to fascism.
Go ahead.
Conservatism wants small government so that individual liberty can flourish. The left, like...
Let's talk about this. Number one, I done been over that a million times in this fucking video, and I'm getting kind of impatient. You can tell how I'm being less... I'm being a lot less patient with the shit he's saying. My voice is getting a lot less professional, and now my voice is going back to like his skater accent now because this is fucking annoying. Let me tell you something. Number one, conservatism and small government, because they don't want the government to actually help you along, so you're more vulnerable to exploitation, which ironically, especially with the interest of businessmen and what have you, creates a more authoritarian society as a byproduct. Which is really fucking funny. Two, conservatives are regularly trying to roll back individual liberties and freedoms. There's even been right-wing talks among like right-wing libertarians and actual Nazis about why they should repeal the Civil Rights Act and why it's not constitutional. And last but not least, dude, I forgot the last thing he even said. Because this dichotomy, about where small government, a government that does nothing but protect the interests of the wealthy and businessmen, is somehow not authoritarian. Because I see why a lot of people believe this shit. Because when you say small government, you think less government influence, but when they say small government, they actually mean less government protection from capitalist exploitation. And there has to be something there to do two things. Number one, help people along in areas of life where they can't help themselves. And two, protect people from socioeconomic exploitation. So yeah, that was weird, man. That was really fucking weird. I don't know if we're gonna get anything out of this video, but I think that's the crux of this video, where it's the 40-year-old bullshit, probably about 45 years old, where the Republicans try to sell small government and worker exploitation as a mark of freedom, instead of talking about the actual socioeconomic deprivation brought on by the lack of government intervention. And I'm not saying I'm a person that's praised the state, let the state do everything for you. I'm a person saying that the state should fill in in areas that you can't fill in for yourselves, regulating things like minimum wage, work hours, work safety regulations, prices on certain goods, inflation control, and breaking up monopolies and what have you, to prevent businesses from getting too powerful over the consumers and the workers. So yeah, it's again, like I said, it's also weird. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, because these people are anti-civil rights and civil liberties. And and if you keep going, and it's like they move their talking points forward as it's necessary, but these people were the anti-civil rights people. They were pro-slavery. They would have been anti-American Revolution, because that would have been a conservative position. And it's just weird keep hearing this guy, especially in real time, trying to conflate government protections of its citizens from exploitation with authoritarianism, when at the end of the day, every conservative position is the authoritarian position. And that's on anything social or economic. Gay rights, the conservative position is to make sure gay people can get married. Black civil rights, blacks should not have economic mobility given to them. And then if you regress a little bit backwards, blacks are not equal as whites, and they should not be treated as such. Women, should not be able to have to be able to get abortions. People shouldn't have religious freedom. Rebellions, against the government. Again, like I said, I feel like the American Revolution and Civil War are the best example, because the conservative position, we keep slavery. The conservative position, we don't rebel against Great Britain. So conservative positions are not about freedom. And it's extremely weird that they always do this shit. Especially, again, fake right-wing populists like Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, and Donald Trump himself. And I guess kind of started with Ronald Reagan. And, with this light dosage of like fascist rhetoric, plus selling less liberties as freedom, which is weird, because you have organizations like Americans Defending Freedom, for instance. And these organizations, ironically enough, want to take away freedom and civil liberties, not expand them.
Gentile wants the opposite, to place the resources of the individual and industry in the service of a centralized state. To acknowledge Gentile is to acknowledge that fascism bears a deep kinship to the ideology of today's left. So they will keep Gentile.
Because that most left-wing philosophies, I think communism believes in a centralized state, but socialism and anarchism definitely don't believe in centralized states. And that's why I feel like we're not going to get into that political philosophy, but that's why I think I'm not going to say I think communism is a bad ideology, and I understand ways that it can work, but I feel like history is not as simple as they want to have, both, communism and fascism want a centralized state. It's other things besides, a more centralized, means of production. That's because fascism doesn't even actually centralize the means of production. It actually promotes more privatization. So, now that I think about it, this does not really apply here. He didn't say anything that was worth responding to, and I don't know why I wasted my time thinking about it. I guess it took me a second, I will say, to catch up to what he said. Because, like I said, a fascist society is a hyper-privatized society. A communist society is centralized, as in the means of productions are centralized. And a fascist society is not centralized, it's heavily privatized. So yeah, it just took me a second to catch up with him. So again, two different things, and he didn't say anything. He's trying to again conflate generic authoritarianism with leftism. And again, as I displayed in multiple examples through this video, the conservative position on a lot of subjects are often at the time the authoritarian position.
Where they've got him, dead, buried, and forgotten. But we should remember, or the ghost of fascism will continue to haunt us. I'm Dinesh D'Souza.
That was the dumbest fucking video I ever watched. I mean, I cannot do this all day. My wife is off working 15 and I gotta go drive down here to pick her up. But like, dude, like, where do I start with this shit? Like, really? It can literally take me all day sitting here breaking down and explaining to the audience out here how fascism by definition is a conservative, is the most, I want to say, warped and authoritarian form of conservatism. And you as a conservative person, if you are conservative somehow watching this video that long, think about how your position, because like I said, conservatism in its political positions, because I feel like at the end of the day, if we're going to be raw about it, fascism is just conservatism but violent. And you know, because like conservatism is just not wanting gay marriage, but you will accept it if you know it passes. Fascism is about actually getting out there and fighting against, you know, gay rights, for instance, or even black civil rights, or you know, women's rights and what have you. And it's like, at the end of the day, man, at the end of the day, or woman, or whoever you are, because there can be they, them conservatives, they exist. But it's like the conservative positions that you hold are literally about stopping progress and withholding relief from people who are suffering under some sort of authoritarian social or economic laws or thought processes. So just think about how your positions are harming people, and then you will begin to understand how the conservative positions are actually the fascist position. And I feel like I did a really good job there describing it at the end. So yeah, just think